Welcome back. I'm Stephanie Mitchell-Urich, recording this lecture for DTN 240 Intro to Nutrition. We are going to spend time in this video finishing up Chapter 2, Tools for Healthy Eating, by exploring food labels, jumping into the dietary guidelines for Americans, and then finishing up some odds and ends for the chapter. Okay, we're going to start with food labels, which is one of the most practical tools we have for making informed food choices. Food labels in general are regulated by the FDA, and we created them to help consumers compare foods, understand what's in their food, and to be able to identify the benefits or risks to their health. So, we do have some requirements that manufacturers have to follow. For example, serving sizes must be uniform and standardized, so that helps us to compare similar foods more easily. We'll talk more about specific criteria for health claims, like what can be said on the front of the box, things like that, and then identify some major food allergens as well. As we go through the next few slides, keep this focus figure in mind. There's actually a video in your textbook that walks through some of the changes that have happened between the old label and the new label and some information about that. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. This figure breaks down the nutrition facts panel and helps you to visualize where each piece of information is sort of located. So we have our servings at the top, we have our calories, and then we have our daily values, and then vitamins and minerals here at the bottom. So the nutrition facts panel has gone through some changes over time. So in that last slide, you could see this one says current label, but this is actually an old label. This was a label that was proposed for some time, but this next one shows the label that we actually landed on. So this is our most current version of the nutrition facts panel. Some changes have been made based on research, what we know about human behavior when selecting foods. And the biggest changes to note is that our serving size has bolded in addition to our calories. So that's intended to draw the consumer's eye to serving size because none of these numbers really matter if we're eating a different serving size than what's listed on the package. So this helps me to know that for every 2/3 a cup that I eat, it's going to have 8 grams of fat. It's going to have 1 gram of saturated fat. I can really look at the label and compare between products. It's important to remember that percent daily values are general references in order to compare foods. So it's saying like for the average person, for example, 8 grams of fat is going to be 10% of how much fat that they need each day. Another thing that is really common on labels today is this percent daily values, like general information down here at the bottom. This is saying that for someone who consumes 2,000 calories, the general goal is to have less than 65 grams of fat a day, have less than 20 grams saturated fat, to have 300 milligrams of cholesterol, and so on. So this helps the consumer to be able to make an educated choice without having that information kind of stored in their head. Another thing to know is that some foods don't have labels. And so think about when you go to the grocery store, fresh fruits, fresh vegetables, fresh meats, things like that. Those don't have labels. Another kind of food that doesn't have labels would be foods that are under cottage food laws. So think about if you go to a farmer's market or something like that and you pick up jam or salsa, something that's made by an individual producer, they don't have food labels most often. They will typically need to list any allergens, and they'll also need some kind of statement indicating that it was made under cottage food law so that the consumer can make an educated decision about food safety. So that was in general about nutrition facts panel. Your textbook has a lot of great information to check out about that to help you. Let's switch gears and talk a little bit about front of package labeling. This kind of labeling is designed to grab your attention quickly. So these aren't as regulated as the nutrition facts panel. So that means they're often more like marketing driven. These are intended for people to choose their package over a competitor just by looking at the package on the front. So you might see phrases like high protein or natural or symbols that are meant to imply healthfulness, like those on this slide right here. They aren't necessarily misleading, they can be really confusing for the consumer. For example, what does Nuval 1 through 100 means? I don't know, but looks like it must mean the product is healthy. Or Nutri-Score, this is a B. Okay, what does an A product look like? Like, I just don't know. So it can be confusing. So we got to do some critical thinking. And this is where being a savvy consumer really comes in. So multi-grain, for example, doesn't automatically mean whole grain. It just means that more than one grain is present, but those grains don't necessarily have to be whole grain. Low cholesterol bread also sounds impressive, but plant foods don't actually contain cholesterol anyway. So if I'm looking at 2 loaves of bread and one says cholesterol free or no low cholesterol, I might choose that one. But in reality, neither one of them have cholesterol. So companies really use this to their advantage when marketing. Same, this picture at the bottom, the bacon, it's kind of fun. It's 100% gluten-free bacon. Well, whole bacon is actually gluten-free. So those are more marketing claims. When we do use health claims, those are pretty tightly regulated. So label claims are regulated statements that describe some aspect of a food's nutrition quality or health benefit. There are 3 main types. We've got health claims, structure function claims, and nutrient content claims. The purpose of these claims is to help the consumers make the connection between food, nutrients, and health. But those connections and the way those words are used generally have to be scientifically supported and are regulated as well. Let's move on first to talk about health claims. So health claims describe a relationship between disease and nutrient or food, and they've got to comply with strict FDA regulations. For example, on this Cheerios box, it says, as part of a heart-healthy diet, the soluble fiber in Cheerios can reduce your cholesterol. Okay, so we've got our nutrient, we've got soluble fiber, and we've got our disease and our condition, right? Cholesterol, like high cholesterol. Um, so heart healthy, those kinds of things. Some other examples, a diet with enough calcium may reduce risk of osteoporosis. We've got our nutrient, calcium, and we've got our disease or condition, osteoporosis. So very tightly regulated, strongly supported by evidence. That's going to be our health claim. Our next one is going to be structure function claim. This one is a little bit less supported by evidence. It's a little bit more vague. It's less tightly regulated, but it's also like generally understood information. So the basic definition of it is it describes how a nutrient can influence a structure or function of some part of the body. So a general statement, calcium builds strong bones. You see how that's less tightly related to a disease or condition. So not osteoporosis, but strong bones. Calcium helps build strong bones. That's a structure function claim. Also, we have fiber helps maintain bowel regularity. So we have our nutrient right here, but we have our structure function, bowel regularity versus like a health claim that would be some type of GI condition. So more general, not quite as tightly regulated. Our last one is going to be nutrient content claims. Our nutrient content claims describe an amount of a nutrient in a food, and it uses terms like low, high, free, or reduced. A major update in 2024 is that healthy is now officially a nutrient content claim, meaning foods must meet specific criteria to use that word. So if you see healthy on a package, it's no longer just a vague wellness buzzword. It has a regulatory definition behind it. So take a look at this chart, be aware of it. The most fascinating thing to me is that a lot of times before kind of learning or understanding about this, I would think if something's calorie free, that means it has no calories. But you can see here that that's not true. A company can say something is calorie free if there's less than 5 calories per serving. So that can get tricky. Okay, let's see. What's our next slide? Okay, so some examples using Campbell's chicken noodle soup. We have our regular can on the far right. That's going to be our regular chicken noodle soup. It has the most sodium per serving, around 900 milligrams in a regular can of chicken noodle soup. So if I'm watching my sodium, I might choose this healthy request or I might choose this low sodium. So it's important to know the difference between those nutrient content claims. With the one in the middle, it's going to say 30% less sodium, and that is how much sodium it has to have, it's 30% less. With the one on the left, where it's low sodium, it has to have less than 140 milligrams of sodium. So that helps kind of unpuzzle that front of label packaging and what companies are allowed to say, and then the actual numbers behind that that are illustrated in this chart. Let's practice a little bit. On this peanut butter jar of Jif, what kind of claim do you see? I see reduced fat. Really, really big there to help draw the eye of the consumer. Do you think this is a health claim, a structure function claim, or a nutrient content claim? I don't see any information about a disease or condition. I don't see any information about like a structure or function of the body. So I'm going to go with nutrient content claim, and I would be right. If I say something is reduced fat, that means it has to have less, 25% less fat than the regular version, and this one does. Okay, next, this one actually has two. We have DHA omega-3, supports brain health. So we have our nutrient, and we also have a structure function, right? So that's a structure function claim. Then we also have that reduced fat milk, which similar to the peanut butter is a nutrient content claim. Now we have our last one. Putting here, we have fat-free at the top. We have calcium, but I don't see any structure function. I don't see any disease or condition. We know that fat-free is a regulated nutrient content claim, so the nutrient content claim. Good job. All right, let's switch gears a little bit and start talking about the dietary guidelines for Americans. We wanted to create a document that's based on current science that offers advice that then can be applied by consumers and has three primary objectives: to promote health, to reduce the risk of chronic disease, and to meet nutrient needs. These are updated every 5 years to allow us to incorporate new information that we learn from scientific studies. This is an overview, like timeline history of the USDA's food guidance. So you can see it's taken a lot of different forms over the years. 1960s, it looks like a wheel into the 40s, and then we have this sort of flow chart. I started receiving nutrition education when I was in elementary school in the 90s, and it looked like this food pyramid here for a little while. You can see we kept that for quite a long time, and a lot of different countries use this food pyramid model. We tried this one in 2005 to show that physical activity was an important part of health, but ultimately we landed in 2011 on this My Plate, which is actually an exceptional communication tool, because if you compare this to all the previous models, like this is like, I can look at my plate. I know exactly what's supposed to be on my plate for health. So it's worked really well for us. We did just recently make a change. The previous dietary guidelines were from 2020 to 2025, so we do have a new set of guidelines that were just introduced in 2026. But I still think it's helpful to take a look at the four overarching guidelines of the previous dietary guidelines, because those still stand. We want individuals to follow a healthy dietary pattern at every life stage. We want them to be able to customize their foods, though, to really fit their preferences and their lifestyle, their cultures and things like that. The focus is good to meet on the food group needs with nutrient-dense foods. So there's our vocab from our last lecture, the difference, right, between energy density, a high amount of calories and a low amount of micronutrients, and nutrient density, where I'm managing my calorie intake but still getting plenty of micronutrients. And then this fourth bullet point encourages people to really limit those food and beverages that are higher in sugar, fat, and salt, in addition to alcohol, which tend to lead to poorer health outcomes. So this is what we have been operating on, is Choose My Plate. And then the new visual tool that was just released is called the New Pyramid, and the tagline is Eat Real Food. So it's really a shift away from what is called ultra processed foods and hopes that people will focus more on fresh fresh foods. I do want to point out that in the pyramid, you see right here, there are, like, we see frozen veggies are good and encouraged, and canned veggies are good and encouraged. So it's just saying focus on these fruits and vegetables first, which is a good message. We want to do that emphasis on fruits, vegetables, and whole grains.
A couple of those biggest changes have been increasing protein needs. So, for a long time, we have promoted zero point 0.8 to 1 grams per kilogram of protein as being sufficient for a healthy adult, but those recommendations are now increased to 1.19 to 1.61 grams per kilogram, and that equates to roughly half a gram to 0.73 grams per pound of body weight for a healthy adult. Another change is that a lot of the wording around limiting saturated fats has been removed from the new dietary guidelines, and you can see that reflected in this new pyramid where we now have things like whole milk and red meat in that protein category of things that are encouraged to consume. It is important to note, though, that sort of in the fine print of the dietary guidelines, that recommendation for saturated fat actually stayed the same, to still limit your saturated fat. So what we know from science is that intake of saturated fat does tend to increase your chances for heart disease. So the American Heart Association still recommends limiting that, consuming that in moderation. But as you can see, we have a new pyramid that is really showing a bigger picture of how foods might fit into a diet. So these kinds of things, they shift, they change, we learn new things about science. So just really important to continue to explore the evidence so that you know some good messaging to share with patients and clients, and of course, to know for yourself.
All right, let's do some odds and ends from the chapter. This is a really fun section in your book that I would love for you to take a look at. Just examining the evidence. Does time of day that you eat impact health? So there's lots of good science in the book to support that timing of your meals is important. So it talks about some ways that our snacking habits have changed. People have continued to increase snacking, and then we reduced actually the number of meals, so more frequent snacking, less sit down meals with family. It's also very common for people to skip breakfast, but it's important for us to know that breakfast has been shown to be a cliche, but one of the most important meals of the day. So it does help with weight management. Um, it helps kind of get your body going at the beginning of the day whenever you need those calories. So that's important to know. There's also some patterns that are highlighted in your textbook about evening eating and about how, as a culture, we've sort of shifted to consuming, like we're skipping breakfast, right? So fewer calories there, smaller lunch, and then eating this large amount of calories at night when really our bodies are ready to kind of slow down and rest. And we're giving it all of this new energy that might be impacting circadian rhythms. So lots of interesting information in there for you to take a look at. The last thing I wanted to highlight were just a couple of different charts in your textbook that are really helpful, probably more helpful for you to look at than for me to lecture over. So this is the summary page of all the tools for healthy eating that's really helpful to look at. And then some just general healthy eating tips that I think will help just in your daily life in applying this information you're learning to what you're actually doing every day. This last one is a fun visual tool too, just showing portion sizes in a way that you can use a tool that you carry with you every day, your hands. So your protein serving size, roughly 3 ounces is your palm. The O, that's about a tablespoon of vegetable oil. It's about a cup. If you have larger hands, might be closer to 2 cups. And then tip of finger is about a teaspoon, aiming for some of your fat. So helpful tools. That is all that I have for you for this lecture. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.